I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, the programme which aims to be a perfect bridge from Sunday morning to afternoon, striding through arts, culture, politics and world affairs. In a few minutes, we'll have 3 top-notch political pundits who will analyse the fallout from the Labour Party conference last week. A glittery performance from Sir Keir Starmer has given a fresh boost to the opposition. Meanwhile, the Scottish Nationalists, whose party conference starts today in Aberdeen, are imploding, which could ease Labour's path to victory next year. What future for the Conservatives if they were to find themselves ousted from power in a year's time? The influential Onward think tank has published the first of several papers urging the party to reject Liz Truss's brand of libertarianism that seems to have such a hold on the membership. I'll speak to the report's co-author. Aside from politics and trains, I'm probably best known for my love of Wagner. But do I perhaps overlook a golden generation of English composers who led the world in classical music at the beginning of the last century? That's the view of historian and journalist Simon Heffer, who will join me to extol the lesser-known Sir Arthur Bliss, the subject of a new biography. And another titan of England's cultural life, Stefan Kyriazis, will be here to tell me what theatrities we should be buying. Later in the programme, a darling of London society will be in the studio. Henry Conway will give us a glimpse of the high life and offer practical advice on how to throw the perfect party. But before all of that, here are your latest news headlines with Elizabeth Callaghan.
Good morning. It's a few minutes past 11 o'clock. I'm Elizabeth Callaghan in the GB newsroom. Thousands of Palestinians continue to flee south as the Israeli Prime Minister tells his troops the next stage is coming. Its military is attacking Hamas by sea and air in Gaza and preparing for a ground offensive. There are reports from the Israeli Defense Force saying Hamas is stopping civilians from leaving. It comes as the Hamas leader met with Iran's foreign minister in Qatar, where they agreed to continue cooperation. The US President Joe Biden has reiterated his unwavering support to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Speaking last night, the US President said hate had caused the conflict.
A week ago, we saw hate manifested another way in the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. More than 1,300 innocent lives lost in Israel, including at least 27 Americans. Children and grandparents alike kidnapped, held hostage by Hamas. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Innocent Palestinian families, and a vast majority have nothing to do with Hamas. They're being used as human shields.
The Foreign Office is telling British nationals in Gaza to be ready in case the Rafah border crossing is opened. It's currently the only route out of the territory. A third government charter flight carrying Britons from the country has departed. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to always stand with Israel. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told GB News the UK government are doing everything they can to get British nationals trapped in Gaza a safe passage out.
We have been liaising very, very closely with the Israeli government, with the Egyptian government, and we know that there have been talks to try and reopen the Rafah crossing. Now, that is the border crossing between southern Gaza and Egypt. At the moment, that is the only credible exit route from people from Gaza. We will continue to work to try and get that crossing reopened, although at the moment it is not open, and that is, of course, making humanitarian and consular support into Gaza incredibly difficult.
Meanwhile, the Shadow Foreign Secretary has said the rise in anti-Semitism in the UK is abysmal and school children should feel safe to go to school. David Lammy, whose constituency has a large Jewish community, told GB News they should feel safe and be protected by law. He also said the advice from police is that Jewish schools can open.
The rise in anti-Semitism is abysmal. We must stand up to this hate. The idea that there are school children not attending school through fear, not wearing uniform through fear, people taking off the Star of David, hiding, pretending that they are not of Jewish faith is entirely unacceptable. And I stand in solidarity with Jewish communities at this time, who must have the full protection of the law.
On to some entertainment news now, and Madonna has kicked off her delayed celebration tour in London following a serious health scare. The 65-year-old had to postpone the start date from July after she was admitted to intensive care with a near-fatal bacterial infection. She told the audience she didn't think she was going to make it and credited her children with helping her to recover. The singer also urged her fans to unite as she expressed her sadness over the Israel-Hamas conflict.
It breaks my heart to see children suffering, teenagers suffering, elderly people suffering. All of it is heartbreaking. You feel helpless, right? What can we do? There's a lot we can do. First and foremost, we can say, I can make a difference because I, individually, can bring light to the world. With my actions, with my words, each and every day.
This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Elizabeth Callahan. Sir Keir Starmer was under pressure to deliver a morale-boosting speech and a rallying cry as he appeared at his maybe last party conference before next year's general election. The Labour leader stylishly breezed through a glitter bomb attack from a left-wing activist by removing his blazer, rolling up his sleeves and projecting a can-do spirit that he'll want voters to remember as they step into the polling stations. But is it just a shimmery projection, or can he change the effectiveness of government in this country to deliver for people, not least by building the 1.5 million homes that he's promised? The Scottish Nationalists are in a mess. They've been routed in a House of Commons by-election, and one of their Westminster MPs has defected to the Tories, both of which are, oddly, good for Labour. The First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, has travelled to Aberdeen while his parents-in-law are stuck in Gaza. His party conference is meant to resolve whether the SNP will claim, after the Westminster general election, a mandate for another independence referendum. To reflect on the politics of the moment, I've got a superstar panel of Aubrey Allegretti, senior political correspondent at The Guardian, Alice Denby, who's an author and editor of the CapEx website, and Charlie Rowley, who worked in government as a special advisor to Michael Gove. Welcome back to all three of you. Alice, I think most people think that the National Health Service doesn't work, the trains don't work, the prisons don't work.
I think it was a case of all that glitters is not gold for his speech. I thought, he did a very good job of sort of stepping up to the moment. I think he certainly sounded prime ministerial. But beneath the detail, there was really very little substance to what he said. I mean, I think it's very welcome that he's pledging to build 1.5 million more homes. If he succeeds, that will be brilliant. But where's the detail of how he's going to do it? And if you look at what policies he has announced, he's got a non-dom tax and VAT on private school fees, both of which I think are fairly unlikely to raise as much revenue as he's claiming. So I'm afraid this is just back to old Labour tax and spend.
Alice, of course, one understands that an opposition doesn't want to expose itself too much because its policies get attacked. But I think my fear is, not so much that they haven't worked out the detail of this or that, but that Labour has no idea of the scale of the challenge, what a mess this country is in.
I think this is true. And when you look at NHS, again, very welcome words about reforming and about looking again at the model. But really, it needs complete overhaul, not just boosting capacity and tackling the waiting lists. And I don't really see any evidence that Labour really is going to step up to that moment and do that.
Charlie, you were up there in Liverpool, and you've told me by message that you thought it was a pretty successful conference. But successful in what sense? Successful in that they're on the way to victory, or successful in the sense that they know what's needed for the country?
I think both. The atmosphere was buoyant, everybody was enjoying themselves. It did feel like a party that was ever more closer to getting back into power after 13 years of opposition. And I think I agree with Alice. The narrative in terms of what Sir Keir Starmer put out there seemed to be right. It seemed to chime with the country. He articulated the problems, but we didn't really see the solutions. So, 1.5 million homes, that's all very well. Well, this government committed to 1 million homes by the end of the Parliament. It's achieved that. So, is there much between the two parties? Sir Keir Starmer then unpacked that housing policy a bit over the coming days by saying that he'd ride roughshod over local communities to just build. Now, how will that impact on the by-election in Mid-Bedfordshire and in Tamworth, where you've got local communities and local authorities who are responsible for effectively approving those planning permissions, and where local people might not want the housing that's in place? We'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
At least Starmer mentioned housing. Rishi Sunak, I think, did not. And we know that so many young people are quite rightly obsessed with housing, but not only the young people, their parents and their grandparents as well. So Starmer did steal a march on the Tories there, do you think?
I think he did, and I think, look, Sir Keir obviously thought that this was the speech of his life. It could be the last time that the country sees him before a general election on a national stage, having a platform to set out Labour's view and Labour's narrative of how they would govern the country. But I think what we'll see from, or what I hope we'll see from Rishi Sunak over the weeks and months ahead, in the run-up to a general election is the drumbeat of policy announcements that when the public become more engaged, because I think there's still a lot of political apathy out there at the minute, people aren't engaged in what's happening in politics. So in a drumbeat up until a general election, I think we'll see more announcements from the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party that addresses things like housing, childcare, the cost of living, and that might just be at a time when the public are engaged and might think twice about voting for Conservatives again.
Aubrey, do you have my bee in my bonnet about the need for fundamental reform? Do you think there's a body of public opinion that thinks that both parties are kind of missing the point at the moment, that so much is wrong, so much needs to be put right, and nobody seems to have any answers to that?
I think he certainly diagnosed the right problems, but when you look, for example, at that word cloud that he was presented with, of what people think about him, which was dominated by the word nothing, you cannot, in 12 months' time, have that as the sort of first thing that people think about you going into a general election. So you do have to start being braver and bolder and advocating more detailed policy. Now, obviously, Labour's really worried that the Conservatives could potentially steal some of their policies, and I think the Conservatives know that certainly on an issue like planning, they find it a very thorny topic, but it is something they're going to inevitably have to address if they want to attract younger voters. But whether or not Keir Starmer can really sort of keep his party in line, I thought this conference showed he absolutely can, which gives him the base to be able to build and be that sort of bolder, more articulate version of what he's going to do. Because, as you rightly said as well, some of the sort of spending policies, the stuff about the money they're going to be able to recoup to pay for the wide-scale public service reform that you talked about, that still isn't at the scale required.
No, I mean, Labour does look like a party that's hungry for power, which is a very necessary precondition. So they're showing the discipline that would enable them to take office. Well, in your sense, where are we now? Are we talking about how big the Labour majority might be, or are we talking about whether they would have an overall majority at all? Where do you think Labour thinks it is?
So there's a lot that can change in the next sort of 12, 13 months. And obviously we have all the way up to January 2025 if the Conservatives wish to go that long. And I know that Labour HQ say they're preparing for a May election because they'd be silly not to, wouldn't they? In terms of the size of a potential majority, I think we're looking at probably the sort of swing that you would see had outshone what Tony Blair achieved. But there's still so much to play for because that would only give them, I think, a majority of one or so. So they've got a huge amount to make up. So whether or not they can really pull it off, I think you still need to convince some Labour people that they're not seeing a sort of the kind of hunger and appetite that they saw in 2015 when they thought they were quite close to clinching it then. They're coming from even further behind now.
That's true, but there are two preconditions. One I've mentioned, which is that Labour is hungry for power and discipline, and the other is that the Conservatives are so defeatist.
Absolutely. I mean, you wander around Conservative Party conference and you can sort of feel, I mean, someone described it to me as like a wake, right? They sort of knew which direction they felt like the wind was blowing in, but there was still a sort of celebratory mood to it. Very few people were sort of openly saying, we think the government's going to lose the next election. But all the sort of background music, the posturing from leadership candidates. And I spoke to a lot of councillors as well who are expecting to potentially lose more seats in the local elections in May. All of that kind of build-up, the background to the next election is not playing favourably.
Alice, I think it's very important to talk about Scotland, partly because it is an important part of the United Kingdom and the SNP is having its conference at the moment, and also because it plays very much into the subject we're talking about. You know, what kind of majority might Labour expect to get? This is, to some extent, dependent on the performance of the SNP. What would be your analysis of that party as it goes into its conference today?
I mean, I think, as you said at the top, the SNP is in a complete mess. They are facing multiple legal challenges and their support is collapsing. There's a huge swing in a recent by-election to Labour. I think the fascinating thing about Scottish politics is that in terms of the desire for independence, that hasn't really changed. There's a kind of fairly solid sort of 42%-ish support for independence in Scotland, and that doesn't really seem to shift. What has shifted is now many more people who say that they would support an independent Scotland are now feeling more likely to vote Labour. And so I think that'll be a really interesting how that plays out in a general election. But yeah, as you say, I think Labour very likely to take a large number of seats in Scotland. And just picking up on what we were saying about Conservative Party conference, I think what was interesting there was that most of the intellectual action was happening on the fringes. It's people fighting for the ideological heart of the party from opposition, whereas in Labour it was all very much on the stage and being driven from the leadership.
Charlie, the SNP is supposed to work out today what kind of general election result for them would constitute a mandate for calling for an independence referendum. I wonder whether many people think this is the most curious debate to be having while the party is in a state of collapse and while the charges hang over their former First Minister and so on. And they're really going to come out with some kind of formula. It seems, I would have thought to most Scottish people that independence was not currently on the agenda. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's a credit, and I never thought I'd say this, but a credit to Nicola Sturgeon to demonstrate just what a great communicator and a politician that she was, even though I fundamentally disagree with her and wanted to break up the union. But you're absolutely right. The SNP are in total freefall, lost a by-election, totally obliterated, and they're not articulating, I think, the issues that really matter to people, which is education. Scotland is always falling down the league tables when it comes to education. There's a huge drug problem in Scotland. And I think, you're seeing SNP MPs vote with their feet as to what party is going to be able to deal with these issues. And it's Lisa Cameron coming to the Conservatives because she obviously thinks that that's the party that will keep the country together and are the best group of people to be able to deal and tackle with the problems that the country faces.
Aubrey, to end on possibly a lighter note, what do you make about the revelations of the extent of power that Carrie Johnson wielded, at least according to the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case and his text messages that have been revealed?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because it sort of plays into everything that Dominic Cummings has been drip-feeding us via his blog for several years. But to see the sort of frankness of the explanation expressed not just by him, but by Simon Case, who was and is the Cabinet Secretary, I think it's obviously a sort of partial, one-sided view, a very sort of small group chat. There are those that think that if Carrie Johnson wants to defend herself, then she should be called up to the COVID inquiry and asked to sort of explain and see if she wants to push back against any of those accusations.
I mean, so far, I think commentators have just been sort of having fun with this. But it struck me as a very serious matter that the Cabinet Secretary was sending that sort of message around. No previous Cabinet Secretary would have done anything of the sort. I mean, I'm afraid it made me think very much that the man is wholly unsuited for the job. Alice, what do you think?
I mean, I'm not thrilled about men who are supposed to be being in charge of the country during a crisis blaming a woman and an unelected one who can't defend herself. But yes, I agree. These text messages do just give us a window into the utter chaos and lack of grip that was being exerted during the pandemic. And I think that comes from the Prime Minister as well as from his Cabinet Secretary, who he appointed as a crony.
Right. Excellent last points. Thank you very much, dear panellists. A marvellous job. Thank you, Charlie Rowley, Alice Denby and Aubrey Allegretti. Now that we've discussed Labour and the Scottish Nationalists, after the break, I'll be asking what future for the Conservative Party. A new report from the influential think tank Onward sets out one option. One of the authors joins me in a few minutes.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's a rather chilly start to the day for many of us, but there is a decent amount of sunshine. That is thanks to this area of high pressure that is situated across the UK. But do notice there are some features moving across the top end of that high pressure system, so some showery outbreaks of rain from northern Scotland will be a cloudier day here. Might see some of those showers pushing slightly further southwards into other coastal districts, but a lot of Northern Ireland, England and Wales will be dry with a decent amount of sunshine. Temperatures struggling though, not seeing much higher than 9 to 12 degrees Celsius for many of us, so rather cold if you are stepping outside. The fine conditions will continue into this evening and overnight, though the showers across northern Scotland will ease back more towards the coastal districts and all of inland areas will stay dry. Isolated mist and fog patches forming overnight, and temperatures again will be dropping off. A pretty chilly one for most of us. Rural frost certainly possible once again across central southern Scotland and into northern England. Will be a bit more cloud around on Monday, so skies a bit milkier. Any sunshine that we do get will be hazy, but some sunshine still trying to poke its way through at times. Showers perhaps now pushing into the far southeast of England, some still across northern Scotland where it will also be a touch breezier. The breeze also strengthening across southwest England. Temperatures may be up by a degree or so, but still not much higher than 12 to 13 degrees Celsius. Something much more unsettled arriving as we head into the second half of the week, though, with heavy rain. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy
energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A sense of gloom pervades Conservative circles as MPs await the fall of the axe, the terminations of parliamentary careers that may occur at next year's general election, since the Tories trailed dismally in the polls. At conference a week ago, the party displayed its factions, one of the most powerful, led by an unrepentant Liz Truss. Although being expelled from 10 Downing Street after only 49 days may be seen as a personal setback, her brand of libertarian free market boosterism remains a popular cocktail that inebriates Tory enthusiasts. This week, a powerful counterblast to her ideas was published in a report by the Onward think tank. The Case for Conservatism argues that the party must use the levers of the state to rebuild the country with an explicit national industrial policy, strong borders and police, and support for families. Its authors are former Downing Street Chief of Staff Nick Timothy and Project Director, a former Special Advisor in the Brexit Department, Gavin Rice. And I'm very pleased to say that Gavin joins me now. Welcome back to GB News.
Thank you, Michael.
What is the solution to the crisis in the National Health Service?
Well, I think one of the most important things in terms of our National Health Service is actually making sure that it's funded properly. And in order to achieve that, we need to make sure that our economy is growing. One of the real structural problems in our society and our economy that you often don't hear talked about enough is our demographic trends. And one of the challenges we face as a society is that we're an ageing society. And you know, in many ways, that's a good thing because people are living longer and they're living more healthily. But that does mean that forecasts suggest that spending on health and pensions and social care are only going to rise, and that means that a larger spending liability is going to fall on a sort of on a compressing or diminishing population, on younger taxpayers and on the taxpayers of the future. So the most important thing is to get the economy moving, to get productivity up, and that means that we can have the tax yields that we can fund the public services that people need of the future.
But no reform of the health service?
Yeah, I think reform is something that any government of left or right is going to have to look into. Clearly, the situation in which people can't get a doctor's appointment
How would you reform it?
Well, I mean, we have two reports that are yet to come out, one on the economy and one on social and cultural policy. So I'm not going to dive into specific report recommendations now. I mean, I think there are definitely supply-side things that can be done.
I mean, the reason I ask you is, you know, I would have thought people's priorities at the moment were basically that nothing works in Britain, or at least that's the perception. You know, whether you're talking about trying to get things built, we've just seen the shambles of HS2, or whether you're trying to run the health service or the prison service. I mean, it just all looks such a mess. The civil service doesn't function in the way that it used to. But I didn't get the feeling that you thought reform of the public sector was important from the report that I saw.
Well, I think reform of the public sector is deeply important to make sure that services are more responsive to the needs of individuals and taxpayers and families. But actually, one of the things that is really at the root of this is the ability to fund those services. And in a way, the elephant in the room is the fact that per capita growth is extremely low in this country. We've got a really deep productivity problem. We seem unable to grow. We lack the industries that actually have that growth potential that could yield a more thriving economy that we could fund those services from.
Well, let's exactly go with your line of argument then. How will you make the economy grow faster? How will you make productivity grow?
Well, I think this is one area where we perhaps differ a little bit from the sort of the very free market libertarian right of the party, who are very wedded to this idea that simply cutting personal taxation will automatically yield transformative productivity growth. No Conservative wants taxes to be any higher than they need to be.
What do you believe in?
Well, so what you need to do is you need to have a tax structure that prioritises incentivising investment over consumption. And one of the problems that we have in our economy is that investment is very, very poor, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So we need to incentivise reinvestment by businesses.
How do you do that? What does that mean? What tax rates or taxes are changed to make that happen?
Well, as I say, I'm not putting forward a specific recommendation today. We have an economic paper yet to come. But as an example of the type of thing, I think it's much more important to talk about investment allowances within things like corporation tax, rather than the overall corporation tax rate. The evidence is pretty clear that it's very, it's creating the right incentives for investment for business that drives growth, not simply having a lower rate of corporation tax or a lower rate of tax for consumers more generally. Another area where we think Conservatives may need to draw on their traditions, but perhaps depart from some of the thinking they've been comfortable with historically, is having a much more proactive approach towards supporting domestic industry, towards fostering exports, towards getting the kinds of industries into this country that have the real capacity for productivity growth through technology and through innovation. And at the moment, we don't really have that in this country.
This used to be called picking winners, and it used to be absolutely derided by Conservatives, who thought that politicians were incapable of picking winners because politicians know nothing about how to run a business. What has given you renewed optimism that politicians can pick winners?
Well, I think this is one of the real sort of stereotypes of our British political culture, particularly when it comes to economics. Everyone's very preoccupied with British leyland from God knows how many decades ago. I think the reality is that other countries are actually doing this all the time. If you look at the sorts of behaviour that China engages in to really vigorously and rigorously back its own industries, sometimes in ways which are pretty unscrupulous, by the way, but also that our friends and allies such as the United States are doing with the IRA and with the Chips and Science Act. But also, you know, there's plenty of examples from the Asian tiger economies as well. The rest of the world is doing this, and the UK is very unusual for having a very slightly complacent, hands-off approach, assuming that magically everything's going to be OK.
Which industries would you back? Which are the industries of the future?
Well, I think there's a wide range of industries that we've got a good head start on, things like life sciences, things like tech, things like AI. Our innovation is fantastic, but because of the model that we have, all too often the real commercial potential from that innovation ends up getting bought up and sent overseas. You know, Silicon Valley VC investors come in, buy it up, and they ship it off to the United States. So we think we need to pursue strategies to keep more of the commercial potential benefit of those industries here. We've also actually got some more middle-tier manufacturing industries that, in relative terms, are very productive for the areas that they're in. If you look at car manufacturing, chemicals, we've got a fantastic pharmaceutical industry, but we don't do the sorts of strategies that other countries do in order to provide the right support, the right incentives and the right rewards for those industries, particularly to help them to grow and to export to the rest of the world.
So, give me an example. The first case you mentioned was that we have innovation here, but the fruits of the innovation are realised in a different country. What's the solution to that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's all sorts of strategies you can pursue. I think you need to look at the investment culture. I mean, if you look at the sorts of things that that were pursued in countries like South Korea and Japan, they offered levels of state support or in the form of credit. We're not talking about nationalising industries here, but in exchange for certain assurances that those industries would give, that they would, that they would list in that country, that they would prioritise employment in that country, that they would not overshore productive capacity overseas. And that sounds like intervention in the economy, but the reality is if the rest of the world is doing this, then there's a real risk that we end up getting left behind. So it's not about nationalising industries, but it is about having a really rigorous industrial strategy that's in the national interest to make sure we get the real benefits of our innovation here in Britain.
This is worthy, interesting and serious stuff. What is in your report that would attract a voter?
Well, so this is big picture stuff. What we believe is that if we were to do this, we could actually drive the productivity growth that would get real incomes rising. Real household incomes have not really risen since 2005. And that means that the promise of capitalism is not working for too many people. You know, sort of the conservative deal rather than the socialist deal is that a certain amount of inequality is okay so long as you have growth and the rising tide raises all boats. We haven't had that for a long time. I think if we can get people's real incomes rising, then people will certainly feel a lot more bought into their country. But there's lots of other areas we explore as well, such as housing. I think that's a key part of the social contract that is missing at the present time. People feel as though they can't afford a house, they can't start a family and get on the housing ladder and have a life. But also areas like immigration, which is something which there's a widespread view. About 2/3 of the population think that is that is far too high and has been for some time, and that contributes to the housing problems as well. So we feel as though if we were to move towards the views, values and interests of the median voter, both in the economy and in social policy, that this could be a magic combination for a winning coalition of Conservative voters of tomorrow. But it does involve changing our minds about some things.
Thank you very much, Kevin Rice, and congratulations on completing your report. Now, let's turn our patriotic instincts to the subject of music, because although I'm a self-confessed Wagner fan, my next guests are here to extol an era during which arguably British composers led the world in classical music. The first half of the 20th century saw the emergence in England of composers such as Ralph Vaughan Williams, Gustav Holst and Hubert Parry, whose anthem I Was Glad has been used by every Windsor monarch, including King Charles, to inaugurate the coronation ceremonies. Among that golden generation of musical talent was Sir Arthur Bliss, the subject of a new biography by conductor Paul Spicer, who joins me now. And I'm very pleased to have with me also Simon Heffer, champion in the world of letters of English classical music. Before we speak to them, let's listen to one of Bliss's earliest works called Rout, an uproarious piece for soprano and instrumental ensemble. So you saw there photographs of Sir Arthur Bliss, and we were listening to Rout, quite an early composition of his. Simon and Paul, welcome to GB News. Simon, first of all, would you like to make the overall case for this era of excellence in British, I think largely English, classical music?
Well, it coincides really with the foundation in 1883 of the Royal College of Music, where Bliss was a student. And Parry, whom you mentioned, and Stanford, the Irish composer, taught a generation of quite spectacular composers. You mentioned Vaughan Williams and Holst. Bliss was another, Moran, Herbert Howells, and of course later in the 1930s, Benjamin Britten was at the RCM. So we suddenly had this conservatoire that was churning out really original and inspired composers who took as an insult the fact that a German had said that we were a land without music, and decided to show that we were a land that had music. We'd had no really great composer since Purcell died in 1695. And I think in the first 50 years of the century, when the great German tradition, which you and I, Mike, both love, had slightly gone into eclipse, apart from Richard Strauss, really, after the Great War, the German composition was not in a good state. France was extremely good. It's the era of Maurice Ravel and Les Six. But the British are leading the way in the first 50 years of the century, and Bliss is one of those. And he's, I think, a much underestimated composer.
Simon Heffer, you wrote a review of the new biography, which is by Paul Spicer. Paul, why did you want to write about Sir Arthur Bliss? Many of us, forgive the pun, are blissfully unaware of him.
Well, it's true. And actually, funnily enough, I didn't particularly want to write about him in the first place. I was asked to do it. And I found that, despite the fact that this period of music is my specialism, that his music was the music I almost knew least of these well-known British composers of the time. And so the approach that I took in writing the book was to get him to persuade me that he was as great a composer as I rapidly discovered that he was. And he was very unusual of his time. I mean, as Simon has just said, it was a period of extraordinary kind of revolution, really, in England. I mean, it was called the English Musical Renaissance, and there were so many composers that came out of Stanford's teaching room at the Royal College, who really, one of their specialisms, I think, was the fact that they all spoke with a unique voice. And some of that reflected a particular Englishness, which perhaps we know best through Vaughan Williams, and before him, of course, Elgar. And Bliss was the one who, as I've called the book, actually stood out from the crowd, because he faced far more into Europe than reflecting the kind of Vaughan Williams gentle revolution that was going on in a kind of more pastoral way. He was particularly influenced by Stravinsky in Russia. The Diaghilev, of course, the great ballet impresario, had brought wonderful things to London, and Bliss saw all these early ballets and was hugely influenced by them. And then you could probably hear in that clip you played from Rout, I mean, it's almost interchangeable, that opening, with the opening of Stravinsky's Petrushka. And I think the thing we shouldn't underestimate is that this generation was the First World War generation. And they went through that terrible period. And of course, when Bliss came out of that, I mean, he had a very distinguished war. He was injured, he was gassed, he lost a favourite brother. And when he came out of it, he felt he had so much catching up to do, and he needed to do something, if you like, which said, look, I'm here. Take notice of me. I'm a late starter, as everybody is. And his music was different, really, from pretty well everybody else writing in this country. And so from that point of view, I found him an absolutely fascinating subject.
Simon Heffer, we're coming towards the end, but how do you react to your rediscovery, perhaps, of Arthur Bliss through reviewing this book? Does it shake you in what you regard as the hierarchy of English music in this period? I would think of you as being a particular advocate of Vaughan Williams. Would I be right?
You're absolutely right, Michael, of course. I've always thought Bliss was a great composer, actually. His Colour Symphony, which he wrote, I think, in 1922, which Elgar really disliked the first performance of, he thought it was too modern, is one of the truly great symphonies in the English canon. In fact, I think it's one of the truly great symphonies of the 20th century. And I didn't, as a result of reading Paul's really first-class book, I didn't revise my opinion of Bliss because it was already quite high. What Paul's book did was confirm to me that perhaps I wasn't alone in this rather eccentric view that Bliss was a great composer. And I hope the publication of Paul's book, and we've got the half-centenary of Bliss's death coming up in 2025, that these factors might promote a greater understanding of his music and certainly more performances of his music, because he is woefully underperformed.
May I say to you both, it's been an enormous pleasure to discuss on a television programme the career of Sir Arthur Bliss and the role of English music in the early part of the 20th century. Thank you to Paul Spicer and Simon Heffer. After the break, we'll continue with cultural matters as Stefan Kyriazis guides us along the glittering boulevard of British theatre. Stay with us.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. During the break, Stefan Kyriazis has entered stage left into the studio. Stefan, you've been to see a re-rendering of a famous Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Which one?
Yes, Sunset Boulevard. So this actually is one of my absolute favourite scores, but it's one of sort of Andrew Lloyd Webber's slightly lesser musicals. This one's been creating a lot of excitement, but also possibly controversy, because it's Nicole Scherzinger starring as the Gloria Swanson role as Norma Desmond, a faded, slightly grotesque former silent movie star. And we have Nicole Scherzinger, who is a vision of gorgeousness. It should be pointed out that Swanson was 51, Scherzinger's 45. So she's not a young woman, but still, 45 today is very different from then.
And Nicole Scherzinger has not been seen in a show for a while, is that right?
She did Cats. Yeah. She was Grisabella in Cats.
That's a while ago.
Yeah. So that was kind of the last major. So she's not known as a musical star, but she's exploring that. And she said very much this is her big chance to show her acting chops as well. It's a Jamie Lloyd production. So for me, that's, if I can see a plastic chair on stage, I know it's a Jamie Lloyd show. And it's for good and bad reasons. So we've had like an incredible Cyrano he did with James McAvoy, which was staggering. A very, very good Seagull with Emilia Clarke, and all times plastic chairs on stage, virtually nothing else.
Yes, there's almost no set.
No, there is no set. It's all completely pared back.
Because what? Because we're meant to... Because the acting is so good, because the story is so good, that we fill in the rest. Is that the idea?
I mean, Jamie Lloyd always does this. So he just pares everything back so the play itself breathes, or in this case, the musical. It's also taken completely out of time. So there are no sets, and we used to have these grand, huge previous sets for Sunset Boulevard. So now everybody's in kind of luxe casual wear, everybody's in black and white, and all we have is an enormous cinema screen up the back of the stage, and that's used all the way through. So when the play starts, we get rolling credits, so like we're in a movie or something. And then we have lots of people wandering around with handheld cameras, which... frankly, even Nicole Scherzinger doesn't look great all the time. And they come right up in people's faces, terrible angles, and it's projected on this huge screen. So you're very much, it's playing with film and stage, but also with social media. So she is a modern star in the sense that she's pouting to the camera, very like selfies, but there's still references to Cecil B. DeMille. So that kind of worked for me.
Nicole Scherzinger got some rave reviews and some quite ungenerous reviews. Where did you come down?
I came slightly towards the rave reviews. She's got a hell of a voice, although I think it's sometimes almost a little bit too big. But within the remit of what they're doing, of a very kind of modern-ish, TikTok-y kind of ex-celebrity star, she does it phenomenally well. She does the madness pretty well. But, I mean, I saw Glenn Close in 2016, and... you'll be shocked to know, wept constantly. This one I found moving and interesting. I mean, there's a bit where it goes out on the street. We're watching them, and they go on the street. He's singing Joe Gillis' character and comes back in the theatre. So it's tremendously entertaining. She's tremendously good and tremendously entertaining. I didn't quite feel, but I really, really enjoyed and admired it.
Let's turn our mind to a new movie starring Anthony Hopkins and Johnny Flynn. They're both playing the part of Nicholas Winton. Nicholas Winton, of course, the man who organised the Kinder transport, which brought so many Jewish people to Britain just before the Second World War. Let's see a clip.
Save one life, save the world.
Forgive me, but how many children are we speaking about?
Can I ask, is there anyone in the audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton?
Well, course, most extraordinarily moving
Yes.
theme, and again, the timing is extraordinary.
Yes.
What did you make of it?
It's very. It knows what it's doing, so it's going for the emotions. But it's tremendously powerful. Two beautiful performances from Flynn and Hopkins. Hopkins in particular, who sometimes he plays kind of these edgier, slightly psycho characters with that kind of very cold gaze. This time it's a much warmer, it's a lovely performance. It's very, it pulls you in and it moves you. You absolutely can't fail to be moved by that moment. Is the 1988 Esther Ransom That's Life moment when they ask everybody in the audience, is anybody here owe their life to this man? And I'm goosebumps now. The entire audience stood, deeply, deeply moving. They recreate that scene in the film beautifully. And at the European premiere on Friday, I think we have a clip. They actually did the same. There were family members and other people in the audience, and they asked them to stand again. And I think we've got that we can take a look at.
Let's have a look at that.
There is anybody else in this room who owes their life to Nicholas Winton. Would they please stand?
Gosh, many years then after that was first attempted to ask the audience to stand if they owed their lives to Nicholas Winton. Many years later, the same kind of result.
Well, also because he saved 669 children, phenomenal. But also they have descendants, so it's exponentially increased from there. So tremendously moving. The film is very timely. Again, migrants, refugees, all these problems. Racial tensions happening, as we know, at the moment in the East. So it's powerful and it's relevant, but also he points out, we know from the story, the Netherlands had closed its borders to Jewish people. No other countries apart from Sweden took any of the children. The USA, everybody turned it down. The last train that was going to leave on, I think, the 1st of September 1939, 250 children lined up. Train didn't leave, 2 survived the war. So it's incredibly powerful, still incredibly relevant. Helena Bonham Carter is fabulous, as always, in the film. But it's beautiful, and yes, it's a bit schmaltzy, but it's so important. It's a glorious, glorious film.
Marvellous. Now, I want you to know that when you come on here and recommend things, people listen to you, or certainly I do.
Good.
So I went yesterday to see Message on a Bottle, which is a ballet based on the music of Sting. And it's a ballet which has forms from classical ballet to breakdance and everything in between. It is a show of extraordinary energy.
Yes.
It's absolutely frenetic all the way through. It displays such athleticism, such skill, such stamina. It's immensely moving, and it's now finished. It's gone on its world tour. But I've looked into this, and it is going to be made into a cinema show. Interestingly, a cooperation between Sadler's Wells and the Royal Opera House.
Yes.
And they're going to produce a cinema version. So even if you can't catch the show in Sydney or Amsterdam or New York or any of the other places that it's about to go, you will be able to pick it up when it arrives in the cinema. So thank you very much, Stefan, for that recommendation.
Absolute pleasure.
It was absolutely marvellous to go along there. And I very much hope that viewers will take your other recommendations. Although today your Sunset Boulevard was a bit kind of...
No. It's still absolutely worth seeing. It's just I like to have a bit of a cry, you know that. But on other levels, it's a massive achievement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. What are you lined up to do the coming week? Do you know?
Oh, I think it's got Lioness coming up with Kristen Scott Thomas. So that's the one I'm most excited about at the moment.
Very good. Well, I hope you have a wonderful week, and you'll be back with me next week.
I will be back next Sunday.
And I'll be here too.
Thank you.
You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News. So we conclude the first hour of the show. But stray not, nor wander far, as I'll be back at the top of the hour. We will be speaking to a survivor of that horrific attack in Israel and reacting to a controversial referendum in Australia. Come back soon.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's a rather chilly start to the day for many of us, but there is a decent amount of sunshine. That is thanks to this area of high pressure that is situated across the UK. But do notice there are some features moving across the top end of that high pressure system, so some showery outbreaks of rain from northern Scotland will be a cloudier day here. Might see some of those showers pushing slightly further southwards into other coastal districts, but a lot of Northern Ireland, England and Wales will be dry with a decent amount of sunshine. Temperatures struggling though, not seeing much higher than 9 to 12 degrees Celsius for many of us, so rather cold if you are stepping outside. The fine conditions will continue into this evening and overnight, though the showers across northern Scotland will ease back more towards the coastal districts, and all of inland areas will stay dry. Isolated mist and fog patches forming overnight, and temperatures again will be dropping off. A pretty chilly one for most of us. Rural frost certainly possible once again across central southern Scotland and into northern England. Will be a bit more cloud around on Monday, so skies a bit milkier. Any sunshine that we do get will be hazy, but some sunshine still trying to poke its way through at times. Showers perhaps now pushing into the far southeast of England, some still across northern Scotland where it will also be a touch breezier. The breeze also strengthening across southwest England. Temperatures may be up by a degree or so, but still not much higher than 12 to 13 degrees Celsius. Something much more unsettled arriving as we head into the second half of the week, though, with heavy rain. Bye-bye.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 12 o'clock and this is Sunday with Michael Portillo, announcing the afternoon with a fanfare of arts, culture, politics and world affairs. Leading this hour, we will reflect on those horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas in Israel and the ongoing violence in the region. I will speak to a survivor of the desert rave where partygoers were slaughtered in their hundreds. A letter written by several prominent KCs criticises the BBC's decision not to refer to Hamas as terrorists, and one of the signatories will join me in the studio. Further afield, in Australia, a somewhat vague proposal to institute a constitutional voice for Indigenous people, which would have required consultation on the country's laws, has been rejected in a national referendum. Australians here in London have been voting on the proposal. One of those firmly opposed is GB News' own Tim Smith. He'll be here to explain why. And slightly further away than even Australia is the asteroid Bennu, from which a capsule has returned to Earth carrying precious particles captured from the asteroid's surface. Scientists believe that they could shed light on the very earliest development of our own planet billions of years ago. Finally, from heavenly bodies to earthly delights, I'll be joined by a darling and dandy of London high society. Henry Cobway is typically seen only after the sun has set, promoting some of the capital's biggest parties and nightclubs and mixing with the A-list from Mariah Carey to Prince Harry. But he's agreed to join us at the unprecedentedly early time of midday to talk of his 20 years at the centre of London's social life. Before all of that, here's the latest news with Elizabeth Callahan.
Good afternoon. It's a few minutes past 12. I'm Elizabeth Callahan in the GB newsroom. Thousands of Palestinians flee south as the Israeli Prime Minister tells his troops the next stage is coming. Its military is attacking Hamas by sea and air in Gaza and preparing for a ground offensive. There are reports from the Israeli Defense Force saying Hamas is stopping civilians from leaving. It comes as the Hamas leader met with Iran's foreign minister in Qatar, where they agreed to continue cooperation. Well, a spokesperson for Israeli Defense Force has told GB News it's continuing to let people in northern Gaza move from their homes to safety.
The worst case scenario is actually that they would stay in where we plan to conduct our operations. So they should evacuate to the south, where there is places where people can get holed up and take cover for the time being. And indeed, when we finish and complete our operations, we will announce that they'll be able to come back to their homes.
The Foreign Office is telling British nationals in Gaza to be ready in case the Rafah border crossing is opened. It's currently the only route out of the territory. A third government charter flight carrying Britons from Israel has now departed. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told GB News the UK government are doing everything they can to get British nationals trapped in Gaza a safe passage out.
We have been liaising very, very closely with the Israeli government, with the Egyptian government, and we know that there have been talks to try and reopen the Rafah crossing. Now, that is the border crossing between southern Gaza and Egypt. At the moment, that is the only credible exit route from people from Gaza. We will continue to work to try and get that crossing reopened, although at the moment it is not open, and that is, of course, making humanitarian and consular support into Gaza incredibly difficult.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary has said the rise in anti-Semitism in the UK is abysmal and children should feel safe to go to school. David Lammy, whose constituency has a large Jewish community, told GB News they should feel safe and be protected by law. He also said the advice from police is that Jewish schools can open.
The rise in anti-Semitism is abysmal. We must stand up to this hate. The idea that there are school children not attending school through fear, not wearing uniform through fear, people taking off the Star of David, hiding, pretending that they are not of Jewish faith is entirely unacceptable. And I stand in solidarity with Jewish communities at this time, who must have the full protection of the law.
On to some entertainment news now, and Madonna has kicked off her delayed celebration tour in London following a serious health scare. The 65-year-old had to postpone the start date from July after she was admitted to intensive care with a near-fatal bacterial infection. She told the audience she didn't think she was going to make it and credited her children with helping her to recover. The singer also urged her fans to unite as she expressed her sadness over the Israel-Hamas conflict.
It breaks my heart to see children suffering, teenagers suffering, elderly people suffering. All of it is heartbreaking. You feel helpless, right? What can we do? There's a lot we can do. First and foremost, we can say, I can make a difference because I, individually, can bring light to the world. With my actions, with my words, each and every day.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Elizabeth Callahan. The events that unfolded in Israel last weekend shocked and appalled people around the world. The Hamas terror group burst through the border from Gaza into Israel, inflicting an onslaught on civilians and security forces that left more than 1,300 people dead. Israel is responding with huge force against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and that has left 2,000 people dead, reportedly including the Hamas commander who led last week's attack. We can speak now to Sharon Weisberger, an Israeli photographer who was attending last week's Tribe of Nova music festival, where hundreds of people were murdered. Her photographs document the transformation of a night of fun and revelry into a morning of terror, and her own story of survival is remarkable. Sharon, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. You must be absolutely traumatised, and I think it's amazing that you're able to speak to us. But to the extent that you can you tell us what happened?
Of course. I came to the festival as a photographer, a very young artist. I draw and I photograph, and I tried to get into the music industry as a photographer for years, and it was a dream of mine. I tried to get into the Nova committee, and I got in, and it was a dream of mine. I was waiting for it around 6 months to get into that festival. And I remember I got there at night, and I came there with two people that I met at the same day through Facebook, because I came alone, thank God. I got to the festival. I spent all the night taking photos. Beautiful people of peace and love, people that came to celebrate. Most of the people were in the army, finished the army. They were there to enjoy life and celebrate it. As the sun was starting to rise up, I remember I took my camera and I went back to have a wide shot of all of the surroundings while the sun was rising up and the beautiful people were dancing. And the second that I went back and I got the shot, the music stopped and people were starting to run around. Panic was all around. People were crying, getting anxiety attacks. While I was looking up at the sky, I see all the sky lit up like it's fireworks with missiles and rockets. I saw black smoke getting closer and closer to us. I didn't really understand what was going on in the first few minutes. And after about 15 minutes, I found the people that I came with to the festival. We got into the car after I told them that I want to stay there. They told me, no, let's get into the car and let's get out of here. That's what saved us. We got into the car and our driver decided to cut through the field and not wait in the jamming in the exit of the festival. Again, that was something that saved us, because the second that we got to the highway, the shooting started on the left side of the road. We continued driving and we went through and we passed two shelters on the side of the road. And again, I was asking the drivers to stop so we could have shelter from the bombs and from the rockets, because that's the thing that made the most sense. And they decided not to listen to me and continue driving. 2 minutes after that, the terrorists came and bombed those shelters and killed almost every single person inside of them. We continued to drive in panic and anxiety, hearing bombs behind us. We hear gunshots, but we don't understand. We don't want to believe that that's what's happening. And then we see a police car pull up in front of us and put a roadblock. And apparently after that, I've been informed that those were terrorists that put on police forms. And we got out of there alive in one piece without seeing anything. But I've been, in the last few days, around all of the people that were in the festival. Everyone is injured, physically and emotionally. People can't sleep at night. The terrors and the faces of all those children haunt me. I look at the photos and I'm trying to edit them to give them to the families, and I see more and more pictures of people that are dead, children that are dead. We need you to stand with us. We need you to understand that Israel is defending itself, and it needs everyone to listen to Israel right now. Everyone is hurt. Everyone is hurting, and we need your help.
Sharon Weisberger, it's been very, very brave of you to come on GB News today. Thank you very much. And your photographs are a remarkable testimony to the horrific events of last Saturday. Thank you for joining us. Here in the United Kingdom, the conflict between Israel and Palestine reverberates intensely as a week of street protests and rancorous debate has demonstrated. One good-tempered dispute concerns the decision by the BBC not to refer to Hamas as terrorists. 5 eminent KCs have written to the broadcaster accusing it of violating its own editorial charter. I'm joined by one of them, Lord Wolfson. David. David, what is your point? Is it that the BBC has a wrong policy, or that it has applied the policy inconsistently in a way that particularly disfavours Israel?
It's the inconsistency point. Roger Mosey, the previous head of BBC Television News, wrote an article in The Guardian back in 2005 after the 7/7 bombings in London. And he explained that the BBC has no problem using the word terrorist. It just has to use it when it's appropriate to do so. And our essential point is this: the BBC used that word, for example, about the 7/7 bombing. It used it about the massacre of innocents in a Paris nightclub, but all of a sudden seems to have a problem using it about this massacre of which we've just heard. So it's the inconsistent treatment which is at the heart of our complaint.
I've read your letter, and I'm slightly surprised because, for instance, you mentioned that the people involved in Manchester were called terrorists. But in your letter, what you actually cite is Terror Attack Survivors Condemn Compensation Body, 17th of July 2023. So actually the word terrorist doesn't appear there. And also you have a reference to the BBC calling Al-Qaeda and IRA terrorist groups. But your reference is a thing called BBC Bite-Sized Guide for GCSE Students. These look like kind of instances which may have been people not understanding the BBC's own policy. Are you saying that, broadly speaking, day after day, the 9/11 attackers, the 7/7 attackers, and that the IRA were called terrorists? Because people's recollections of this seem to be quite confused.
Well, if you go back to the 7/7 bombings, for example, the BBC editorially has called those people terrorists. And I accept the BBC has a difficult job. I'm not a BBC basher. I support the BBC. I like the fact, if I can say it on this channel, that we also have a national broadcaster. What I do ask for is consistency and explanation. In this case as well, the BBC has to recognise that it's not just that what happened on Saturday, it seems to me, was the paradigm of terrorism, but also Hamas is a designated, prescribed terrorist group as a matter of law in this country. Now, again, I'm not saying that whatever the government says the BBC has to follow, but we are at an odd situation where lots of broadcasters, including this channel, have no problem calling Hamas a terrorist organisation. The law of England and Wales calls Hamas a terrorist organisation. The BBC has used that word in other contexts, but refused to use it here. What I think the BBC has to do is to think again about its own policies. And I appreciate that might be difficult while the war is going on. But afterwards, I think there has to be some real thought at the BBC as to how it's going to deal with this issue going forward.
Have you tested yourself on this? Because I've been testing myself. So, you know, if the Ukrainians fire a rocket into an apartment block in Moscow, I would certainly not call that terrorism. Of course, the Russians would. Lawrence of Arabia blowing up trains and bridges, I would not call terrorism. Of course, the Ottoman Empire certainly would. I called what the IRA did terrorism, but of course many people in Ireland, and indeed many people in the United Kingdom, did not. You see what I'm getting at, that the word terrorist is used by different people in different contexts, or rather we each choose what we're going to describe as terrorism.
Well, I can accept that there may be some instances where people will use the word terrorism for political purposes. But equally, there are instances where that is, in my view, the only word which adequately describes what happened. And when you read the accounts of what happened on Saturday, which was a deliberate attack to murder people, some toddlers were shot and their grandmothers were taken hostage. Sometimes it was the other way around. They took the toddlers hostage and shot the grandmothers. That is terrorism by anybody's definition, and we should have no problem calling it out. If we don't, we lose moral clarity. And that's what I'm also concerned about. As a society, we need to have moral clarity about what happened on Saturday, not least because for those of us, and I'm one of them, who support the concept of a Palestinian state, who support a two-state solution, the only way to get to a two-state solution is to recognise that groups like Hamas have got no part in a future Middle East, because it's Hamas which prevents the work towards a two-state solution and not advances it.
What about this idea? The BBC is a 100-year-old organisation which was founded with some extraordinarily important and impressive guiding principles. And one of those was that it would not be emotional, that it would not be sentimental, that it would not be hysterical. And it sustained that position even through the Second World War. People would not run around the studio. They would refer to the enemy, but they wouldn't start, editorialising. And although you've found some examples of inconsistency over that 100-year history, it's trying to do something which it regards as quite important, which is, as I say, to remain calm, to address every issue with proper journalistic standards. Do you have any sympathy for that explanation?
I have every sympathy with the objective, but I don't think it explains what the BBC's actually been doing on the ground, so to speak. Absolutely, hysteria has no place in a newsroom. It's not a proper emotion to have in a newsroom. But what a newsroom has to do is actually report what's happened. And in my view, and those of us who wrote the letter, and I think many others, what happened on Saturday was terrorism. It was terrorism carried out by a group which in this country is designated as a proscribed terrorist organisation. And it's not hysteria to call that out, it's simply calling things what they are. And I hope that it may be difficult, as I say, for the BBC to change its policy, so to speak, or change its approach mid-war. But at some point, the BBC is going to have to think about how it handles this going forward, because the refusal of the BBC to call Hamas terrorists has caused deep consternation, not only in the Jewish community, but way beyond it.
Thank you very much, David Walton. Thank you not least for discussing it in such a very civilised manner. Could I just take this opportunity to pay tribute to all those people who work for the BBC and for all the other channels who find themselves in danger at the moment, bringing us the story of the terrible events. After the break, we'll discuss another rancorous debate that looks to have been settled by a referendum in Australia. The proposal to institute a constitutional voice for Indigenous people was overwhelmingly rejected by voters. I'll be back in a few minutes.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. There is a fine couple of days ahead for many of us, and there's a lot of nice conditions around throughout the rest of this afternoon and evening as well. The showers we do have across northern Scotland will be easing back a touch. Might see some isolated mist and fog patches forming overnight as well, and temperatures will certainly be dropping off for many of us once again. Another chilly night on the cards, low to mid single figures in many of our towns and cities, but a touch of frost is certainly possible in some rural areas as well. So you may may well need some extra layers as you start off the day on Monday morning. Will be a touch more cloud around on Monday compared to what we have seen throughout this weekend. So the sky's a bit milkier and sunshine hazier in places, but some sunshine trying to poke its way through and still largely dry for most of us. Showers just fringing into the very far southeast of England. Might still see some across northern Scotland as well, where it will be a breezier day. The wind's also strengthening across southwest England. Temperatures up by a degree or so in a few places, generally around 11 to 13 degrees Celsius. This rain in the southwest, though, is a signal of things to come. This area of low pressure will be gradually pushing its way northwards as we head throughout the rest of the week. High pressure on Tuesday, though, clinging on to the far northeast, so Scotland, after a pretty chilly start, seeing a decent amount of sunshine throughout the day. Elsewhere, this shield of cloud will be pushing its way northwards as we start to see gales developing across parts of Wales and southwest England, and this rain will then start spreading its way northwards as we head throughout Wednesday and Thursday, perhaps very heavy in places. That's all for now. Bye-bye.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. Even before the polls had closed in a national referendum in Australia, it was clear that voters had decisively rejected the proposal to insert a voice for Indigenous people into the country's constitution. How exactly the voice would have been enacted was never fully detailed, but critics argue that the policy would institutionalise racial division. And many Indigenous people opposed the idea. Australians here in the United Kingdom were able to vote on the question. Among them our own Tim Smith, a former medal-winning oarsman, and at one time the youngest member of the Australian Liberal Parliamentary Party when he won the seat of Kew in the Victoria State Parliament. I hardly have to welcome you to GB News, but welcome to the studio.
Michael, thank you.
You were very much on one side of this issue. You were a no voter and campaigner, but can you be objective and explain to us what it was all about?
Yes, because, and this goes actually to the great weakness in the Yes campaign, almost across all aspects of Australian society, people want to recognise Aboriginals in the nation's founding document. And had this referendum simply been about symbolic recognition of the first custodians of the continent, it would have had 90% support. The problem was that the voice was both recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the Constitution, but it was also creating a new entity, a de facto third chamber of the Parliament based on race. And Australia is a particularly egalitarian country, and suggesting that one race be treated any differently to any other race in Australia, it just doesn't pass the pub test, as we say in Australia. And it was voted down accordingly in every single state. This was voted down. 60-40 voted no nationally. So that is a whopping defeat for the Yes campaign, because they got it wrong from the outset. People wanted to recognise Aboriginals in the Constitution, but not the way it was proposed by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
I was saying to you earlier, because we met outside, that I've been in Darwin and was absolutely shocked to see the number of First Nation Aboriginal people who were clearly drunkards and drug addicts. Would this proposal have done anything to close the gap between the original community of Australia and the rest?
Well, the argument made by Jacinta Price, who is an outstanding Indigenous senator from the Northern Territory. She's the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs in the Australian Parliament. She made the point that this would do nothing to alleviate disadvantage in regional and rural Australia, where there is significant disadvantage, as you saw in Darwin and other communities in the Northern Territory. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have a life expectancy 8 years less than their fellow Australians. So that's a national disgrace.
Yes.
And it's embarrassing and it has to be fixed. But this is not the way to...
What are the policies that can deal with that?
Well, I've always thought it's about education. Education. Getting kids away from drunken and abusive families into schools. And there are some terrific charities that are taking children from regional and remote communities and taking them to some of the best schools in Melbourne and Sydney. We've got to see more of that, because that's the way you close the gap, by giving Aboriginal kids the same opportunities as kids anywhere else in Australia.
In recent history, the word referendum has meant to British people enduring division.
Yeah.
Families torn apart.
Yes.
Will this heal in Australia over a reasonable period of time or not?
It's going to take a while. 40% of the community wanted this thing. 60% didn't. And yes, there are family members who are not talking to one another.
Yeah, we're familiar with that.
As a consequence of this highly divisive campaign.
One last question, if I may, to bring it to a British point of view. It seems that a government is unlikely to be tempted into another referendum shortly, and that means that we're not going to have the question of the royal family put to a referendum in the near future, and that means that King Charles III can breathe a sigh of relief.
I think the monarchy is safe in Australia because of this no win for another generation. Anthony Albanese was asked about this at his press conference on Saturday night in Australia. He didn't answer the question. Labor has an official policy of Australia becoming a republic. They said they intended to put a referendum to the Australian people in their second term. I don't think that's going to happen.
Tim Smith, thank you very much indeed for putting your oar in today.
Thank you, Michael.
In a few minutes, we'll delve back billions of years to the very earliest history of our planet as scientists investigate particles from a distant asteroid. But before that, we're going to bring you right up to date with the present, your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 12:30. I'm Elizabeth Callahan in the GB newsroom. The United Nations are warning hospitals in Gaza full of wounded people could run out of fuel and supplies within the next 2 days. Israeli army say it is allowing safe evacuations of people in northern Gaza as the Israeli Prime Minister tells his troops the next stage is coming. Its military is attacking Hamas by sea and air in Gaza and preparing for a ground offensive. There are reports from the Israeli Defense Force saying Hamas is stopping civilians from leaving. It comes as the Hamas leader met with Iran's foreign minister in Qatar, where they agreed to continue cooperation. A spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Force told GB News it's continuing to let people in northern Gaza move from their homes to safety.
The worst case scenario is actually that they would stay in where we plan to conduct our operations. So they should evacuate to the south, where there is places where people can get holed up and take cover for the time being. And indeed, when we finish and complete our operations, we will announce that they'll be able to come back to their homes.
The Foreign Office is telling British nationals in Gaza to be ready in case the Rafah border crossing is opened. It's currently the only route out of the territory. A third government charter flight carrying Britons from Israel has departed. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to always stand with Israel. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told GB News the UK government are doing everything they can to get British nationals trapped in Gaza a safe passage out.
We have been liaising very, very closely with the Israeli government, with the Egyptian government, and we know that there have been talks to try and reopen the Rafah crossing. Now, that is the border crossing between southern Gaza and Egypt. At the moment, that is the only credible exit route from people from Gaza. We will continue to work to try and get that crossing reopened, although at the moment it is not open, and that is, of course, making humanitarian and consular support into Gaza incredibly difficult.
You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Michael is back after the break.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Scientists from the Natural History Museum will be amongst those investigating particles scooped from the surface of an asteroid over 200 million miles away. The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft took 3 years to ferry its precious cargo back to Earth, which will now be studied to find clues about how our planet might have formed and evolved some 4 billion years ago. To shed more light on this, Oh dear, it looks like we've lost that line. So we will come back to that story in just a moment. I'm pleased to say that our colourful studio has been eclipsed by the presence of Henry Conway, a darling of London society whose very career I won't attempt fully to explain. But Henry, suffice it to say, has promoted parties for pop stars of royalty, launched hotels and clubs around the world. But now he's really made it. He's being interviewed on GB News.
Indeed.
Marvellous to see you, Henry.
Michael, darling.
What a dream career. How did it begin?
Well, just loving parties, really. Yeah, I was always very social, and so a friend asked me to, bring some people to a party in a nightclub, and it kind of kicked off from there. So yeah, very early on. So I did a famous nightclub called Mahiki on Dover Street in Piccadilly.
When you say you did it?
So I was one of the team that launched it.
Does that mean you had money?
Well, no, that was all taken care of. Nightclubs are a big beast to fund, so it's like a whole phalanx of different people were behind that.
But what did you have to offer? Why did people think you were the right person to get on board?
Because I knew lots of people. Because people, these places, these venues, like parties as well, and I'll get onto, but they, you need bodies in a room. You need bodies in a room. They take a certain amount of sort of curation. So any really kind of hotspot, a hotspot doesn't become a hotspot accidentally. As we well know, very few things happen accidentally. So there's an element of curation and making sure that people are handpicked to be with you.
How did you get to know all these people?
Good question.
Let's think of the sources.
Yeah.
University, for example.
University. So yeah, some were universities, some were schools. So I was very, very lucky to go to Harrow. So, and that is certainly in terms of like an elite little pot in which people kind of meet each other. And I was very social at school as well. There were like lots of girls' schools that mingled with us and met with us, and we did big parties while we were at school. So it's just a very kind of sort of natural, it's just a very natural thing. I think social stuff you can't really force that much.
And when you say you knew people, tell us about the people you knew.
The people I knew. Well, so obviously there was a kind of Tatler set going on when I was very young. So there were the young royals that I kind of knew by default. That I was the same academic year as William. So there was all of that kind of set. So I knew a lot of the peripheries of that.
Were you in the same place as William?
No, so I was at Harrow, he was at Eton. We weren't at the same school, but all of those schools, everyone kind of knows each other. So
and having the princes, of course, would be absolutely the best possible couple of names for any club.
Oh, it made Mahiki, and it was Guy Pelly, who was Prince William's best friend, was part of the team too, and then it just kind of becomes a thing, and then pop stars want to come, and all the demi-monde want to come, and it kind of sort of it can sort of just roll from there. So we did extraordinary parties for extraordinary people.
Did you have any chance to go to other clubs? What was your personal taste when you went clubbing, when you weren't being a professional?
When I wasn't being a professional party boy, I went to lots of different places. So I quite like big scale clubs as well. So I went to Ministry of Sound a lot.
Yes.
I eventually ended up working with Ministry of Sound. I was creative director of Head Candy for about 3 years. They have a wonderful record label, so I had the great opportunity to work on Rita Ora's first singles and some of the best DJs in the world that we then had in our nightclubs. So yeah, I mean, certainly now I still go out quite a bit now. My nights are late, always.
we're so impressed.
This is early for me. This is very early for me.
Midday. And how has clubbing changed? I mean, for example, has it changed a lot in the internet and social media age?
Oh God, hugely. So when I first started going out, it was very kind of dance around a table, big dance floors, and things have kind of they've changed. The kind of club that you really only get in Monaco in the south of France now are the kind of clubs that I started out in. That was the Mahiki model. That was the model for so many clubs of the early noughties, and that really only exists now in Vegas and in the south of France. London is now much more kind of cool and edgy and does big nightclubs, and then everything else is sort of cocktail bars and chic. So now most of the places that I look after. So I've kind of moved out of clubbing life into launching big hotels and restaurants, which is great fun. And they're much more kind of individual, small, charming venues that we now fill with lots of big celebrities, and it's great fun.
Henry, I'm hearing that your fan is causing a hurricane across your microphone.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Would you mind fanning?
I will fan myself from down here in a very kind of 18th century way.
Very good. You're very warm, are you?
I am so warm.
So you've made a good living out of this.
Yeah.
Has it, frankly, has it made you rich?
I mean, we never talk about money, but I do all right. I do all right.
And where will you go next with it?
So I'm loving doing all of the big parties that I do at the moment. So I relaunched the Dorchester at the beginning of the year, which went very well. And we've got some other big hotels that launch at the end of the year.
A party might have what kind of budget?
Ooh, anything from, I mean, it really depends. I work on small scale ones to huge ones, so...
What would small scale be, budget-wise?
Budget-wise, 20,000, maybe?
Oh, yeah, that is
Yeah. Well, I mean,
there are some people who would offer, I suppose.
No, but actually,
I thought
parties...
you were going to say a bigger number.
Yeah, but parties can be anything. You know, I've worked on ones that are millions and millions of pounds, and I've worked on ones that are about kind of 150,000, which is the kind of average for a big-scale London launch. But I mean, like, the wonder for viewers at home, you can do a party on any budget that you want. It's very much about bringing you those kind of elements of parties to make things interesting. So music, always good music. I believe in good music. I believe in disco, always. So, they start off calm and then go to disco. And then liven up.
And disco is good because it brings all the generations out at the same time.
All the generations out at the same time. And then of course, people. You have to make sure that your people are entirely right. And there may be some bad eggs. Get rid of your bad eggs, always.
What's a bad egg? I mean, I give quite a lot of parties. I agree with you about the music.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people who are intergenerational.
Yes, which is very important.
I have people who are very, very different one from another.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that I would have a bad egg, because if one person were very different from another, I think, well, that's a kind of success.
Oh, yeah. I think having people that are different is very important. So my parties tend to be incredibly diverse. They can be from pop stars to actors to politicians. Do
you have anyone who's not a celebrity?
Oh yeah, lots.
Yes.
And I think that's very important. I mean, I use quite a lot of, I have a lot of art students, a lot of model agencies that will send their people. But there's a lot of friends of mine that will come. I mean, so say when you're doing a charity party, one of the things that when you're doing a big charity do, you have your donors and you have your dynamos. So you have your people who are kind of like maybe have to be there. Say for example, if you're doing a corporate party, there are people that have to be there, and then you have people that make the place pop and zing. So it's kind of curating those people who are going to make it pop and zing.
My goodness, you've made a real skill of the whole thing, and I congratulate you.
Thank you very much.
Extraordinary career. And I'd be very grateful if you'd say hello to your father.
I will do, I will do.
I used to be colleagues.
Indeed.
Thank you very much to the wonderful Henry Conway. As we were reporting earlier, scientists from the Natural History Museum will be amongst those investigating particles scooped from the surface of an asteroid 200 million miles away. The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft took 3 years to ferry its precious cargo back to Earth, which will now be studied to find clues about how our planet might have formed and evolved 4 billion years ago. And I hope we're now joined by planetary scientist Andrew Lound. Andrew, thank goodness you're there. It's lovely to see you. What on earth, as one might say, is the connection between an asteroid so many million miles away and our Earth?
Yes, good afternoon, Michael. Yeah, it's a very exciting thing. The asteroid, which we're looking at here in particular, Bennu, like all the other asteroids, and there are millions of them, are the leftover bits from the formation of the solar system. When our solar system started, it began with the formation of the sun at the centre, and it was surrounded by dust and gas. And this material began to form into small planetary bodies. And a lot of this material was in asteroids. And as the Earth began to form, the asteroids pummeled into the Earth and delivered to the Earth, and the other planets for that matter, raw materials such as nickel iron, which eventually settled at the centre of the Earth to form the Earth's core. Other materials we think were distributed here, including the building blocks of life itself, materials like sulfur, carbon, and so on. Possibly even water was distributed originally to the Earth from these bombardments. Now, the asteroids settled into their general orbit, which is between Mars and Jupiter, but there are some rogue ones which fly all over the place. Bennu is one of those, and Bennu actually crosses Earth's orbit, which made it an extremely good target to send a spacecraft to. 2 reasons. One, it's an old object, 4.5 billion years old, but the second one is it possibly at some point might collide with the Earth, so we need to actually have a look at how we could deflect it.
What then do we think we might find in these particles? We might find carbon, is that true? Might we even find water? I suppose that's rather far-fetched.
No, that's actually correct. Ashley King of the Natural History Museum is one of the 6 people who've had a quick look-see at the sample already. I mean, there's about 250 grams of the sample, far more than they expected to collect. And what they found is they found actually water molecules trapped inside the mud-like substance within it, or clay, that's a better description, clay substance within the samples itself. And that's a very, very important discovery, because that suggests that this is a water-rich asteroid. It's found various types of carbon material, probably mixtures of material as well. Sulfur has been found there. And again, these are all materials which are critical to the formation of life on Earth itself. We need this material to kickstart life and get carbon chemistry going. So that's been discovered already there. And to find water encased within the samples is really critical, because one, it could give us an indication that water was distributed to the Earth from the asteroids, needs to be analysed. But secondly, for future missions, if we want to obtain water, for instance, from the moon, is very important, but from the asteroids would be great for refueling spacecraft. Water splits into hydrogen and oxygen, and therefore you've got a fuel, combine them together again, and you can generate electricity and heat, which of course is in a hydrogen fuel cell. So it's absolutely vital that we found this, and it is actually there now.
May I ask you what is probably a very stupid question? Is the thought that an asteroid might have brought, for example, a very small amount of water to Earth at the time of its formation, and that somehow has turned into oceans and lakes? Or are we suggesting that vast quantities of water arrived on the planet? Can you just put me right on that one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, this was a process that happened over a period of time. The bombardment of the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, 4 to 4.5 billion years ago, was vast. You can't imagine just how many bits of material there were out there. And although one asteroid could distribute a small amount of water to the Earth, there would be millions of impacts which could distribute the water to the Earth itself. So yes, it's a cumulative effect that you get from loads and loads of impacts themselves, possibly through comets, although analysis of cometry, water in comets, suggested, in fact, that the isotopes within the water itself were different. So that's why the tests of the asteroid one is going to be really important to us. But yes, it would be billions of impacts over that period of time, which led to the water coming to the Earth.
This seems like an extraordinarily exciting discovery and moment.
Oh, yes. I mean, this is just fantastic. I've been waiting for this kind of thing for years. This is the third sample we've had from a comet and this from our asteroid. And this is probably the biggest sample and probably the oldest of the asteroids that we've been able to sample so far, and learning so much from it. It's just going to be a game changer. It's going to be a game changer for generations. 70% of the sample material will actually go into cold storage to wait for scientists who are yet to be born to use instruments yet to be devised to actually analyse the samples. That's how important this actual discovery is now to us. And we might get an indication of where we actually come from. And I think what's quite important, especially from Bennu, is we know an asteroid 66 million years ago wiped out the dinosaurs or helped lead to the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's an interesting thought to think that asteroids could have actually brought the seeds of life to the Earth itself, and an asteroid like Bennu could actually take that away from us.
Andrew Lound, absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited now, having listened to your explanation. What an extraordinary moment in time.
Thank you.
Emily Carver has joined me, and you're going to be on in just a few moments. What have you got for us today?
Fascinating. I love that guy there, that expert, space expert.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
With everything else that's going on in the world, it's so marvellous to have this moment when we're discovering something about the origins of the planet. And this is sort of news that's in danger of just getting lost as a sort of footnote. But it's fundamentally important to us.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you focused on it at the end of your show. We're going to be talking, of course, about the Israel-Gaza war ongoing. We're going to be getting, we're going live to Charlie Peters, our reporter at the top of the show from Tel Aviv. We're also going to be speaking to military experts, defence experts, foreign policy experts, and really getting into what's going on, including the international response, and also looking at the rallies that were held in London and elsewhere yesterday. And yes, that's going to be what we're going to be covering mainly. We also have a few surprises as well for some other news as well towards the end of the show. So will be some light relief, perhaps, from everything that's going on, because I think for a lot of people it's been a very stressful week, a very emotional week. Huge amounts of division that is playing out, unfortunately, in the West as well. So we're going to be looking at that and getting experts on as well.
I was very impressed listening to Charlie Peters from Tel Aviv earlier. I'm quite impressed, really, that GB News is able to get someone out there and someone who's so kind of level-headed and well-informed. I was saying earlier that one must pay tribute to the people who are out there for all the channels and all the stations reporting on this. Many of them will find themselves in danger. They'll find themselves in physical danger, and they'll find themselves, I think, in emotional danger, because they're going to see and have to report upon really terrible things. And I think it's just a moment, perhaps, while there's been a lot of criticism of journalists and while there's this debate raging about the BBC, actually to pay tribute to the importance of journalism and the extraordinary courage that it often requires.
I think that's absolutely right. And Charlie going to Tel Aviv while there are bombardments ongoing, it's a brave thing to do, and he's bringing us absolutely fantastic level-headed coverage from there, speaking to all the important people that he can, and he's had to, head to the shelters many times now, so it's clearly a scary situation for anyone, and I think he's doing a fantastic job. And yes, we must also pay tribute to all of the press, all of those people, war correspondents, foreign correspondents who are out there, some in Gaza, some in Israel. And yes, fantastic job. I'm not sure if I would do it, but there you go.
It may lie ahead of you.
Respect to them.
May lie ahead of you in your career.
Who knows?
Never know. But your show is coming up in a moment. Emily Carver, thank you for being on with me. And thank you to all my guests today for making themselves available on a Sunday morning. I do so much appreciate that. I will be back next week. Until then, goodbye.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's a rather chilly start to the day for many of us, but there is a decent amount of sunshine. That is thanks to this area of high pressure that is situated across the UK. But do notice there are some features moving across the top end of that high pressure system, so some showery outbreaks of rain from northern Scotland will be a cloudier day here. Might see some of those showers pushing slightly further southwards into other coastal districts, but a lot of Northern Ireland, England and Wales will be dry with a decent amount of sunshine. Temperatures struggling though, not seeing much higher than 9 to 12 degrees Celsius for many of us, so rather cold if you are stepping outside. The fine conditions will continue into this evening and overnight, though the showers across northern Scotland will ease back more towards the coastal districts, and all of inland areas will stay dry. Isolated mist and fog patches forming overnight, and temperatures again will be dropping off. A pretty chilly one for most of us. Rural frost certainly possible once again across central southern Scotland